rather snappy, won't you? I have some very heavy thinking to do before 10 o'clock.
I don't think you guys can understand how friggin' hyped up I am today. I've got the legend of Central New York, Matt Reed. Welcome, Matt.
Yo, Chris, man, thanks for having me, dude. I'm pumped to be perfectly imperfect today.
Oh, I think we've known each other long enough to know there's some imperfection on both sides.
For sure. I mean,
so
my biggest strong suit is being imperfect. So I was made for this.
I love it. So for everyone, you've heard the intro. Matt is a professor. He's a marketer. He's a cook. He's a mixologist. He is a fucking badass marketer with a TV show. Him and his partner, Alex, and the whole gang, they just hit PBS. They're killing it. And Matt is married to the queen of Central New York, Stephanie Crockett. Had a whole episode of the new show that I just watched this morning. Dude, you're like the most interesting man in Central New York. How does that feel?
Well, it feels really good, but it probably doesn't say a lot about Central New York if that's the game we're playing with. But it feels really good, man. Like you, I get bored easily. So it's really been quite an adventure to have your hands in a whole bunch of different shit and then figuring out like where can you make a difference and kind of impact people in a good way. So thanks for that great intro, dude. Like I gotta have you follow me around. Like my students will take me seriously, you know? You're a great hype man.
Put me, Rob can hold all the cameras and the boom mic. I'll just carry the megaphone and hype you up.
Love it, dude. Love that. Yeah.
So I do things a little bit differently here. Usually people wait to the end to ask questions. I'm going to get them out throughout. I have severe attention, whatever it's called, squirrel, tin roof, all of that. So Matt, you and I both are very proud of our ink. What was the most painful tattoo you got?
So I have the most painful one. I think it's more of a sensation. So I have a tattoo on my chest and I have a tattoo that goes down my spine. And the sternum creates this weird vibration. And then the spine created it wasn't so much pain as you'd feel it vibrate in the end of your fingers. But not like a good sex toy vibration, more like an uncomfortable like you're shaking a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've had a few of those. I'd say the most painful, I got my side done. I still haven't finished it 15 years later. It's an outline with a little bit of coloring, and I can't do it.
Just the pain?
I got ribs over here and not a lot of protection and padding.
I don't have any side tattoos, but I know the tattoos on your arm have really great detail. And I can imagine it's probably some level of detail there too. And the really fine things probably just I have nothing on my ribs because even though I do have a lot of padding, I've heard it's a really brutal place for a tattoo.
Yeah, it sucks. Around the nipple hurts too. I strongly urge people not to do that one.
Okay.
But I gave up on the marathon tattoos, so now I've just gone clip art, kids stuff.
Yeah.
That my kids draw all of their drawings, and I've moved on to my legs. So
awesome.
That's a new canvas that's not as bad until they hit your damn shin bone.
I also have one on my shins that are brutal. But what do you think your coverage is now? Are you 50% covered?
No, I'd say about 30. I got plenty of. I've been toying around with a design for my back.
Awesome.
But we'll figure it out. I like to collect tattoos wherever I go, and it's just easier to get small mementos.
Totally.
And I don't cry or scream as much.
I love it. I love the collection too. That's super cool.
Yeah, you got to. I mean, again, we have fun. I was on a call today, and I'm in the fintech world, and they're just you can see when, especially when you're on camera, and then you do something with your arm, and then they go looking at you like you have two heads. But the world has changed. Matt, we've known each other for quite a while. As I said, you're a marketer. That's where I first met you as a marketer. You were the COO at Digital Hive, which we've talked with Jeff Knaus and what he did with that. But really, your brain works just amazingly different when it comes to marketing. And I'll never forget being around a table and you guys presenting a concept that at first we were kind of like, huh. And then it was like, holy shit, this thing's going to work. Where did all of this come from? Because a lot of the interviews I've seen you do and a lot of the talking is about, hey, Matt, here's where you're at today. But I want to talk about the younger Matt that didn't get to this point yet.
Yeah.
You're a creative dude. Where did all this come from?
Well, thanks, man. And it takes one to know one because part of that, though, too, and I remember that meeting that was at it was right down the road from our offices. You were at the CMO at Bankers Healthcare Group. You had your team in there, and I remember that pitch. But I remember also being comfortable in that pitch because you're an open-minded, aggressive dude, so it allowed us to get a little bit more creative on it. But it's funny when you say where it came from. I have some answers to that, but when I first started in advertising and marketing, I wasn't on any creative side at all. I was a media buyer at Ogilvy and Mather in New York City, which was a cool job. And I wanted to find my way into that way. So I went that through account service and then into operations and the creative side from there. But for me, this is when I tell my students a lot. I didn't find out, or it's not that I didn't find out. I knew that I could do creative stuff and be funny, I think, and be emotional and inspirational. I think I knew that in my 20s, but I didn't think other people would take it seriously. So I started to, in my late 20s and early 30s, start to make that move and try to really transition to the creative side. So when I'm talking to my students now, I'm like, look, don't wait like I did and be like, oh shit, like I can do that too. You know what I mean? So for me, it was a bit of a late start, and it was more like getting more of the confidence in going at it, because I think a lot of people think their ideas creatively have to come out perfectly, and the first ones always suck. Great ideas are born out of super shitty ideas. So if you want to be good at something, suck at it first. So I was just sucking at it on my own on the side, and then eventually trying to work into it. So at first it was kind of a lack of confidence in my own abilities that kind of led to that kind of transition.
And transition it did. I mean, you've seen just about every aspect. And by the way, I started as a media planner and buyer too, down in Charlotte for Price McNabb, which Mower bought right after I left.
Yep.
But that creative side, for me, I came in, they tossed finance stuff at me. I had done media buying, planning. And the more and more I learned about customer behavior and the tie-in with creative and messaging and strategy, it changed the way I looked at advertising. It wasn't Mad Men, right?
Yeah, right.
With that, it was like this imposter syndrome. Like I wasn't a designer. Like we all know Karanya, the world's greatest human being, right? Yep. I've never met anyone that was that good at creative that understood every other aspect. Yeah. So from my perspective, I stepped into that world and it was hard. I had imposter syndrome. I'm like, I don't belong. I don't know what I'm talking about with typography and colors and all of that. I just know how I feel. Yeah. Did you have that same feeling?
Yeah. And I mean, I think my wife and I talk about this sometimes, and her, and she's a CEO of an ad agency, and you being a CMO at all these different places, imposter syndrome never goes away. You always have it. It's like once you're infected with it. So I think for me, when you're going through that feeling, imposter syndrome usually is a good sign though, because it means you're doing something that maybe is out of your comfort zone or moving in the right direction or whatever it may be. But everybody has days you're like, oh shit, I can't do this. I had them all tricked, But the way that I look at it, and you and I have this we're similar in one way, but different in another. You have a really good handle on you're able to speak both right and left brain. You're really good at understanding analytics and data and being able to convert that to emotional shit and content, where I can't. I need someone else to basically translate the data into some kind of insight to do that. But what it comes down to for me, and I think what resonates with you and a lot of people, is just the emotional aspect of it. How are we going to make people feel, are we going to make an ad that's going to make someone hungry or horny or, stressed, right? Humans seek emotion. We play video games, it's a computer program making you more stressed out. So for me, it's always been, if you can get to the root of the emotional aspect of it, which is my biggest strong suit and my biggest weakness is emotion. I think I can make people feel some form of emotion, but I also take things really personally. So to me, the gateway has always been the emotional aspect of it. So if I get caught in the imposter syndrome, we're writing our stuff for season 2 right now, and I know you and how you work, and you'll grind and do a bunch of stuff, and then you're kind of see it, you're too close, you're like, this is terrible, and then you give yourself a couple hours, you're like, oh shit, this is gonna be really good. No, this is terrible. So kind of it's the wave of understanding that it is the wave, right? That your goal is not really how you feel so much as how are you going to make the other people feel. And that to me is any type of creativity, advertising, anything is about making someone feel something.
Yeah. And, that's one of the goals I have with this podcast. I have no idea how this thing's going to turn out. But the people that I'm talking to, a lot of them I know, and I know of them and how they've made other people feel. And that's why I wanted, especially you on here, because of where you came from how you did it the right way, and where you are today, and obviously where the hell you're going. As you mentioned, you have season 2. You guys were originally season 1, I believe, 16 DMAs that you got picked up in on
Yeah, yep,
PBS.
yep. So far around 16, and then we're moving, and then but more being added on now. So as the first wave has kind of come on, other markets are like, we'll take one, we'll take that on. So yeah, that's and it's really weird, Chris, because like one of the things I actually was thinking about you when we were looking at, we were talking to someone about how to do this, and they're like, well, there's not a formula for how to do this, and you at one point were talking about experimental marketing when we were talking about like you were one of the first people I know to really get behind the concept of targeted YouTube advertising. So we're learning this shit as we go. And like all of a sudden we're like, oh shit, is this going to work or not? Then another market picks it up. So the numbers, yeah, 16 seems accurate, but I know that those are continuing. There's more now. So yeah.
That's awesome. It's a great show. I watched the one with your wife, the boss bitch. She just got a promotion. But what I love about what you're doing, right? It's relative and it helps that I knew who you were. But if I didn't know you, it's so easy. Like you don't have this pretentious asshole, male or female, that
Yep.
thinks they're better than everybody else. Like, dude, you're Matt. And I think anybody who doesn't even know you the way I do would say the same thing. Like you go through and you're just real at every step from how you went and prep and got all the meal prep stuff. And then as you're cooking, but then you bring in people that mean something to you. And that's just, it's such a cool recipe. To me, it feels a lot like, and I sincerely mean this. Anthony Bourdain is one of the greatest entertainers, but it was relative. I have people in my life that I know a couple of people that I'm like, man, you remind me of him.
Yeah.
And that's the way I felt when I was watching that episode today. And what were the influences, or what are the influences on this show that kind of give you that guide for how you're taking it?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And thanks for saying that type of stuff. Like Anthony Bourdain obviously is an influence, and we'll never be anything like that because he's so highbrow and so like although he's while he's relatable, he's like otherworldly. You know what I mean? Where like you badly would want to hang out with him, but I don't know. I've never met a person, maybe besides my wife, maybe you, that would be cool enough to actually hang out with that dude because he was just like ultra cool. But for me, you brought up something interesting about like knowing me versus not knowing me if you're just watching the show. So I thought about at one point you and I think Danielle Gerhardt came in and talked to some of my students, and you did it in a way that was relatable to them, even though in reality, like I mean, at the time you're like in your mid 30s and you're making a lot of money. They're not making any money, and there was still a common ground, and that was that kind of your passion for what you were doing. So I think what it comes down to is, for me, good people beget good people. So from a close-knit standpoint, like my business partner, Alex, he and I see things very, very closely. You and I do the same way. We have the same kind of value proposition. And also the good people bring other people up. Like I've been guilty of being a jerk and an asshole and probably done some scumbag things back in my day. But like other people kind of bring you along and bring you up. So first of all, the primary thing is like there are external groups, people that we're influenced by, but the first primary thing, so I will give you some of the external like famous things that we're influenced by. But the first thing is we want to basically have our audience watch our show and be like, yo, I want to be a part of that. I want them to feel like they're part of our extended social circle. Like they can see themselves at a party with us or hang out with us in some type of way. So, and where we got influenced by that a little bit was the pop punk band, and I actually saw them in Charlotte, and that was your old stomping grounds. But they like will make like toilet humor and then emotional stuff, but you just feel like you're part of the party. So our influence has been a wide range of stuff like that to things like some cooking shows like Molly Yash has a show called Farm Meets Girl, which her show, like I honestly, our show is kind of like a more masculine version of that, and hers might be more feminine, and we try to incorporate, and so does she, that different blend. Delicious Miss Brown maybe is another one. So there's some Food Network stuff, but a lot of it's really, really built from throwing parties. I like skateboard culture. Alex is a big hockey guy, so there's different things that like Spittin' Chicklets he loves, which is like a podcast about like so he. Sometimes I wonder like are we making a cooking show that has a side podcast, or are we just making Spittin' Chicklets? Because but Alex is a really great natural storyteller. So the inspiration from afar is like I want to learn from these different big people like Molly, yeah. But actually from a closeness thing, a lot of times it's like Alex or Stephanie, or like you mentioned, Jeff or Kate Hauker talking to you. Like I was excited about this call because I'll come out of this like, oh shit, Chris mentioned this type of thing. That would be kind of cool. I know you used to work at a Harley dealership, and like we've been trying to incorporate some type of that aspect in it, but while also like putting in some type of feminine spin. So it's really kind of, I'm not trying to sound cheesy, like, oh, it's the world around us, but it's like the people
Right.
around us, you know?
It's amazing how our experiences shape that. Like hearing you, I worked in marketing for a dealership that had a bunch of locations. I rode a Harley when I met my wife. Living in Florida, that had to go quickly because that's like just suicide.
Yeah.
It's scary down here, and
Yeah.
so I got rid of my Harley. But that culture, I saw that culture. I've been in fintech. I went into the gun safe industry, which I didn't own a gun. I mean, now I have gun safes and guns and all
Yeah.
that. I live in Florida. Everybody has that.
You have to, I think, to live there.
It's a requirement. But one thing I learned, it was, and I'm going to tie it into, you mentioned something which James Domro, your podcast is awesome in the studio. I absolutely loved it. I loved your episode. But there was one piece you talked about with social justice. And where I'm going is, you talk a lot about like your wife, she's overcome the glass ceiling. She's broken through the glass ceiling
Yeah.
in a crazy industry. I was in motorsports, fintech, and guns. And it's tactical. It's the guy, I'm their target audience.
Yep.
So I've always tried to take a different approach where we looked at up and coming audiences within those. Like females are the number one fastest growing group of firearm owners. So we took our marketing and branding and went into that. And it's amazing what happens when you get outside of what the norm is. So when you talk about social justice, you found a way, and I've been so impressed, and I think people need to read between the lines sometimes. I've been so impressed with how you can incorporate things into your podcast, into your TV show, into your daily being. Is that hard nowadays with all of the craziness going on?
I don't think it is hard, but there's a couple of rules around it. So the first one I think is acknowledge your place in the world, right? So I'm a straight white. I identify as a straight white male. So my students be like, oh, he's stale, male, and pale, right? Like an old white guy, which is valid. So one, acknowledge that, but also and acknowledge anything you might have done stupid in the past or anything. But in reality, the social justice thing is if you're authentic to yourself, then it all kind of comes through. And like, so in a lot of our episodes, we love to make the joke at the studio sometimes is when are we finally going to get fined by the FCC for all the dirty jokes and stuff that we make? But we can get away with making dick jokes and sex jokes and stuff because we make it very clear that we really respect women, right? And we can talk about like sex toy jokes because we talk about how we don't kink shame and we're big into sex positivity, and we can talk about the different cultures because food. There's a lot of areas where you could really get into like cultural, more than cultural appropriation. You can do a bunch of stuff like that. But so we come out and like, look, man, this is why we love different people. It brings people together. So if you are able to authentically be like, listen, these are our core values. So now here's a dick joke, right? Or here's like something else we're going to work in there. Like in the episode, like when we first pitched the episode you referenced earlier, the boss bitch brunch, someone's like, you can't say bitch on TV. And we're like, well, we looked it up. You can. And here's how and why we're going to do it. They're like, you're going to call your wife a bitch on TV? I'm like, yeah, dude. The show is about the fact that she's a super boss bitch. And we need to change the perception about life. Like, I learned this fact. 72% of Americans that make over $100,000 a year are white men. So, and you and I are one or two of those people, right? So, like, when people are like, oh, it's so hard to be a white guy these days. No, it ain't, dude. It's still pretty easier than anything else. So, we wanted to talk about the importance of shattering the glass ceiling and the gender pay gap, but still including everybody, right? Because there's a place for everybody. When I first interviewed at Lemoyne College, when I first started teaching there, I was at a bar that I go to a lot, and someone was like, oh, yeah, you don't want to go there. They're never going to hire you. I'm like, why? Like, well, you're a white dude. They're not going to hire you. I'm like, well, look, I'm still going to apply there because they're interviewing me, but if they had Matt Reed and then another person, let's say a female or a minority or a BIPOC version of me, and we're both equally as talented, and they're like, hey, it's going to be better for our students to bring in a BIPOC woman then do it. I would not walk away being upset about that. Like, you're doing right by the community that you're in, right? So if you can make it clear that, like, this is my value system, like, we're inclusive, like, we want our parties and our show to feel inclusive and exclusive at the same time. Like, exclusive, like it's a cool party that you're gonna know something to get into, but in reality, everybody feels welcome. So I think for us, that has been working pretty well so far, and we're going to continue to try to push that line. So that's like, there's an episode that you haven't seen yet that will air. It premieres in, I think it's one of the last episodes. We're throwing a party on a boat, so we talk about body positivity, and we get pretty raw in the jokes, but they're kind of be like, "Oh yeah, I get it. These guys, that's cool." When in reality, we probably shouldn't say some of the stuff we're saying.
Yeah, I was listening to Joe Rogan, and I was listening to Neil Brennan, who I think is just a brilliant comedian. And again, I'm the type of person, I go down the middle, right? Yeah. Like I don't care. You and I can have different opinions and talk through them. Yep. And not enough people do that. And he talked about comedians are really the last group of people that get away with saying a lot of that, or the entertainment industry, because everybody else is so scared to come out and say anything without fear of being canceled. And I really think what you're doing, and again, the open honesty, or your honesty of, here's who I am, but I don't have a problem with any of this other stuff.
Right.
We can have a good time and talk about it. So I think that more people need to do that. And it leads to the next question. How in the hell, with what you're doing, who you know, and in Syracuse, how do you stay real when all of this stuff is happening so fast? And I heard you talk about people they're recognizing you. They recognized you long before the show, but now you're getting that. And as this spreads, how do you keep that ground in your life?
It's weird. That's a weird question, because I don't think about that as much, and that's not me being like, oh, hello. Like, I try not to think about it, because I'm still uncomfortable around some of it. And when you mentioned like Neil and like him creating like the Chappelle Show, or that, like, their approach is different than ours. So like, we're going to offend everybody, therefore,
right.
Which was awesome. That's one of the best shows of all time. But like, our deal with that is we want everybody to feel like we're going to celebrate all our differences and all that shit aside. When it comes like people seeing me in the grocery store and talking about their food, at first, and my wife kind of coached me on this, I would kind of be like, I would pivot back and be like, oh, tell me about whatever you're doing. But they actually want to talk about it. So I don't know. It's not getting in my head, because one, we're working all the time. Like, like when this call is over, I'll be going back and doing more work. But how it works is, for every time you get something like that, people are like, oh, I really like your recipe, or like, this is so cool. I've heard a bunch of people be like, oh my gosh, you look better in real life than you do on TV, which is a really nice way to say you look like shit on TV. Or like, oh, like you're like, this one woman told me, she's like, oh, you're not as tall as I thought. And someone else is like, oh, you're not fake. That actually is you on TV. And I was like, okay, so like, you thought I was a tool beforehand. So I think part of it is some of that, is some of the realness of that coming through. But I also think too, in today's day and age, right, with the exception of like massive stars, because of things like this podcast and, I mean, I'm not talking like Post Malone or like, Taylor Swift, but a lot of like celebrities, we get to see them in their personal lives. So they become more humanized. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. Not that we'll ever be at that level. Like, you mentioned like Anthony Bourdain. So Anthony Bourdain, or like a Guy Fieri, or, anybody that's at that Cat Cora, that they're like that ethereal level of like superstar in the food industry. That'll never be us. So we'll be like, hopefully something where like Molly, or something at that level. So I think also the nature of what we do doesn't like put you in any awkward positions. I don't think anybody's like, oh my God, like I masturbated to this cooking show last night. Oh, and if they did, no, we support that. That's cool. So I don't know, but it's like, I mean, but you're the same way, Chris. Like when you're around people here, like I've been in bars and someone like in the marketing world, especially a younger agency person, like, oh, that's the CMO of Bankers Healthcare Group. I want to go introduce myself. So I think it's kind of relative. In the small world that we live in is just a bigger version of the same small world.
One of the funny things, my sons, I have twin sons that just turned 9, and when you guys first started, I think you were on WSTM with Melanie Johnson.
Yeah.
Right. And I had worked with her when I was with BHG. There was a story she did about a child, and we put money out to help. And, she was just an amazing person. But it was always funny because every weekend we would turn the TV on, and my kids grew up knowing who you were, the cooking guy. And so it was you and Steve Harvey. He was Uncle Steve. Sorry, you weren't, an
Yeah,
uncle.
not that cool.
But those were the two people, you guys were the two people he knew. So I was telling them, they're 9 now. They don't remember what they were watching as babies. But you've had that kind of impact. And I don't care what people say about national, local. You brought something, and I almost regret moving, except for the weather, out of Syracuse, because I grew up there. I moved away. I came back, started my family. Now I'm back down in Florida. But Syracuse is cool again. It's like the 80s. You and I are the same age.
Yep.
My dad worked at Carrier and was on the potato farm. And then it went let's be honest, it went to shit.
Yeah.
Mayor Walsh and a bunch of people and investment. But the side that people don't talk enough about, there's like a badass group of people that are creative, that are, that are just doing cool stuff. And again, James has had them all of you guys on. I left that and I'm like, man, I miss those guys, because now I'm in Orlando, where it's just, it's a huge metropolitan area, and it's not as easy to make change or to influence. How do you think about your responsibility for both you and your wife in the circle to help build that community back up and be a part of that change?
That's an awesome question. And that's another reason why I do wish that you were back in this marketplace, because your description about the people that are in it is really true. Like Tommy Lincoln is like doing work with like Kevin Smith, right? Like, and the agencies and the tech stuff is going in a really cool direction. Then Micron coming here. But I think for the creative area, I think there needs to be, which at least I see, like I learned from my wife a lot, is kind of a really characteristic of everybody is a trait of fearlessness, right? Like for us, like, we're trying to make this show go, and we've got really high hopes for it, and we're working hard on it. But in all honesty, failure is likely, right? Like this could be right now the farthest that we go, and we'll still be proud of that. And then, but if it fails, or like I say, it goes one step further and it's in 50 PBS markets or something, and then, it doesn't really get any bigger than that, or it collapses, or this is as far as it goes. Alex and I would just be like, maybe go separate ways or do something together. Be like, all right, what cool can I jump into? Like, I had a reputation of being a job hopper. I would leave this place, go to that place. Like Digital Hive, I remember the day telling Jeff I was leaving, and Jeff is like one of my favorite people and best friends, and because I wanted to go teach, and he wasn't mad about it. But that was I remember when we pitched ideas to you, when Jeff and I were in pitching to you, and then like actually one of the ideas that we pitched to you, now that I'm thinking about that to me is the defining characteristic of this culture here, the creative culture here. We had an idea that originally, before you saw it, it was based off of like an old Sam Adams commercial and the Old Dirty Bastard Shimmy Shimmy Yeah music video. And we the day before we were going to pitch it, Jeff was traveling. And he came in and I'm like, hey, listen, here's what we're going to show Chris and those guys tomorrow. So he watches it, and we're all sitting there, and I look at him, and he's like, I don't like it. And I'm looking at him. So I look at him, and I start to kind of explain like the thought process. And he goes, I get it. He's like, I just don't love it. And I'm like, so kind of feeling like crestfallen. I can feel the team like deflate. And I'm like, okay, well, we've got like 24 hours. Let's go back to the drawing board. And he's like, no, don't do that. He's like, you believe in it? I'm like, dude, we love this thing. And he's like, all right, let's go. And if it doesn't work, it's on you. And he didn't mean like it's on me, like you're fired if it doesn't work. He's like, it's on you to explain if these guys don't like it. So I think that approach is kind of this interconnected thing where people are encouraging of others, even competitors. Like Tommy was on there, and you mentioned my wife. My wife will talk to other agencies, and they'll kind of encourage each other and keep pushing each other. So it's a collection of people that kind of don't give a shit and are going to try to, most of them do right by the community. So I think it's sustainable, because like we're trying to reduce Syracuse is the only city in New York State to grow in population in the past couple of years by like 0.01%, but that's a really big positive. So it's a big blow when you lose someone like a senior level creative leader like you to leave. That kind of sucks. But the concept theoretically can survive that, because you're going to have 5 or 6 youngins come up. They're going to start to grind. So I think it's really a shared, not give a shit, but give a shit about the right thing type attitude that I think is putting this community in a good position.
It's such a it is a close knit, and I think everybody roots for each other. Things I thought back on, I didn't even realize I was telling this story until I actually told it, that you were actually one of my best recruiters when I was a CMO at BHG. I look back at so many of the folks that you introduced me to, one of whom, Jeff Kodo, he came in and you're like, Chris, I got this guy. You got to talk to him. He came in, and Jeff is one of the most interesting people I've ever met. And he comes in a suit, and here I am in a t-shirt and jeans. And
Yeah.
I sat there, I'm like, Matt has lost his goddamn mind, And after 5 minutes, I'm like, holy cow, we talked for 2.5 hours. I didn't even have a position for Jeff. And I said, you know what? I'm going to hire you. I want you to come in and just figure some shit out. And he did. And we worked together. He and I left around the same time. And then I called him up when I was at Securit, and Emily Serino now, we were like, we need Jeff. And I tried. Emily took him to lunch. Next thing I know, Jeff's in. So now that I'm with Funding Circle and, as their interim CMO, I called Jeff and I was like, Jeff, I need you. And Jeff's there, and, some other people. So you guys are not only ambassadors for Syracuse, but the people in it. Talk about Tommy Lincoln. After I saw that episode, I was walking up the stairs to my kids' room, and we have pictures everywhere. It's like a weird museum. I have 2 of his original hand drawings before Stay Fresh, when he was doing the thing outside of Everson, the little market or community market.
Yeah.
And so I took a picture of those, and I was like, Tommy, this shit's cool, man. I'm like, my kids love this. And so it was just really cool to see the growth and maturation of you, of Tommy, of all of us. We've kind of all come up together. And, I think there's great things. I'm not saying I won't be back there at some point, but I miss that piece of it, that community, because there's so many cool people that, I watch you guys do your thing on the show, and it's a great area to be. Couple other questions, because I know you got other stuff to do. You talked about you're still trying to find a pro wrestler to come celebrate with one of your shows. As you know, pro wrestling is my thing.
Totally.
Ironically, my next door neighbor is a referee for the NWA. So I've gotten to go see, I've partied with Ricky Morton on Super Bowl Sunday, the Rock and Roll Express. I've got all my wrestlers behind me. My wife calls me a dork. So again, if you need help making that happen, let me know. Who's your favorite pro wrestler?
My favorite pro wrestler of all time, without question, is the great Macho Man Randy Savage. And I love, at one point, one of my favorite quotes ever is he was on the Arsenio Hall show, and he said that Hulkamania is just a grain of sand in the Sahara Desert that is Macho Madness. And
I love it.
I was hooked ever since.
He was amazing.
Yeah, Stone Cold Steve Austin I liked. Rey Mysterio I also like. How about you?
I'm Road Warriors. So I grew up. The first time I saw them, I was so little, and they were wrestling in the AWA. It was on ESPN at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yes.
And they got Greg Gagne and tied him up in the top rope. And again, people, it's fake. I get it.
Yeah.
But they hit him with a steel chair, and this guy gets busted open. And I'm like, these guys are huge. They got their faces painted. I mean, they were bodybuilders from the mean streets of Chicago.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to do that. Totally. And, obviously, you can see I'm not going to do that. The cruiserweight division, I'm too old now. But
you could have pulled it off back in the day.
I love it. The reason why I like the Road Warriors too, they came out, this is before licensing and all that bullshit. They came out to Black Sabbath, to Iron Man. And I'll never forget, my kids my boys were 4, and they're twins, right? So that my brother always called them Danger and Destruction. And I looked at them one day, and I was watching YouTube, and I had wrestling on, and it was that. And my son Cash came up and sat down, and he's like, what is that? And he had the same reaction I did. He is obsessed. For the last 5 years, his favorite song is Iron Man. He knows every word to it, and he's just obsessed. So it's funny how wrestling can bring that out, but wrestling's also an unbelievable storytelling suspension of disbelief. So whenever I hear someone talk about it, I'm like, yeah, those are my people.
Definitely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that it's funny though, the entrance music thing. We met a guy, Just Joe, that he's done. He did like when he's at Brain of Sin, they did like the big
Yep.
shows entrance music. But that's always been a question that I love to ask people, like, what would be your entrance music? So for Chris, don't worry about rights being managed. You're coming into the ring and you're the defending Intercontinental Champion. What is blasting as you make your way down there to beat some head in?
Oh God, I would say Thunderstruck. We came out to that in basketball when I
Oh, yeah.
played basketball at Chittenango, and
Yeah,
that was like the jam.
yeah,
I don't like I love rap, but I mean I'm just a rock and roll kind of guy, you
yeah.
know. What about you?
Choice. I don't know. Like, I think it changes. I think you could get different answers on different days. It might be "Forever" by Drake because that
There
is
you
a
go.
really cool song, or probably like "Voodoo Child," either the Hendrix or Tom Morello version. Either way,
I
I'm ready to
heard someone, I can't remember where I heard it, but they were like, could you imagine? Because I love music, and one awesome thing, if any of you haven't seen the website, go to spatchcockfunk.com and go into the shows, because what Matt and these guys do, they have the episode, they have a description, but right to the right, they've got a playlist. Fucking awesome, man.
Yeah, dude. Thank
Um,
you, man.
I absolutely love it. And someone talked about Jimi Hendrix, and they're like, and it might have been Neil Brennan. I can't remember, but they were like, could you imagine being around in 1967 and hearing Voodoo Child?
Oh my
Like,
God.
I mean, nothing ever sounded like that, And
Ever.
now we've got all of this,
Yeah,
and I don't
yeah.
think we appreciate it.
That's a great point. I don't know that we do. There's still times like when I'm seeing live music, like we're gonna go see Foo Fighters this summer, and saw Bruce hit by some of the vibes. You're like, wow, I'm in the presence of like greatness. Like we saw Rage Against the Machine. I felt that way, but
When did you see Rage?
I saw them the last time they toured. They were in Cleveland. This is like 2 years ago. It was awesome though. Like Zach, they were had a broken foot, and he was still like just killing it.
I saw Rage in Charlotte, and I think it was 98 or 99. It was Rage and Wu-Tang.
Oh, dude, that's like my dream lineup card.
Oh my God, it was insane, dude.
That must have been awesome. But that's the thing, like that feeling you get like Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to fuck with. And you're in a crowd, and the crowd's like up, and you're like, yeah, man.
It's crazy.
No matter
Did
what.
you go to the Foo Fighters concert in Syracuse a couple years ago?
I did. It was one of the best shows I've ever seen.
When they almost missed it, and then the police escort, and Grohl gets right up on stage, changes his sneakers, and goes for almost 3 friggin' hours. That was like a bucket list moment for me.
Same.
Yeah.
And they were supposed to like at one point it's like, oh, there's a curfew, but we're just gonna keep playing anyways. And I mean, probably because they were late, you're having a couple extra drinks, but when they got on, it was one of the best live shows I've ever seen. The energy was just unreal.
What to go along with music, what's your latest search on Spotify or iTunes?
Well, I've been getting into there's two very different directions. So usually I would say it would be some kind of hip hop stuff, but I've been getting into a lot of some new alt stuff, like in some kind of soft feminine alt rock, like Girl in Red or the Marias or Cannons. I don't know why that vibe is super cool. They're kind of like a little bit similar to Glass Animals, like some of that type of stuff. Or I'm also spending a lot of time on what on Sirius would be Channel 3 Faction Punk. So a lot of like Rancid and Offspring.
Oh, Rancid was so good.
Social Distortion, that type of stuff, yeah.
Offspring played in Cuse. They opened up for 311. And I was there to see. I always liked Offspring. But at 60 years old, those guys rocked.
Yeah.
In 311, I just about fell asleep.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Which is surprising, but and not surprising at the same time. But those are my playlists. But I was thinking about this actually because I knew you'd want to talk about music, and I was like, I wish there was a way you could do this. Like there was an app on your phone where I could just wave it over you, and it'll show me like the past 10 songs you listened to. You know what I mean?
I think it tells a lot. It really does.
I'm probably lying. I didn't mention it. I also listened to the new Taylor Swift album to see.
I did too.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I got to tell you, man, kudos to her. All these people that hate on her, she's a brilliant marketer, an unbelievable music. Again, and I heard the conversation you had with James.
Yeah.
Not my thing, but I respect the hell out of it, man.
Oh, you have to. She's it. So what are you listening to right now?
I actually just got back into Sublime because I went down the TikTok rabbit hole and I saw Bradley's son has taken over, and they got the whole original. Yeah. So I'm like, holy shit, this is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
And so I've been listening to a lot of its video. But then I on that Bad Bitch Brunch podcast or playlist, you've got Lana Del Rey.
Yeah, dude.
She's
Cover
covering.
you in time. It's awesome. It's
Dude,
straight
I mean,
fire.
I was sitting here doing a couple sets of stupid dumbbells to try to get rid of the flabby old guy stuff.
Yeah,
And I was listening to that and I'm like, man, she is talented. So now I went down the Lana Del Rey rabbit hole.
So that's how I got into the canons and some of the like Alice Merton and that type of the women
Alice Merton.
Super dope. But the women of indie rock, like, and I don't know why I keep finding myself downloading that music, but the gateway drug for me was actually Lana Del Rey. So that cover of that was cool, and then I'm like, she's kind of cheesy. And then I listened to like all sorts of other shit, and I'm like, oh man, she's got this little edgy, cool vibe that comes out of nowhere. So yeah, dude, I'm totally doing that.
That's like, so one of the things, I've got an outdoor kitchen out here, you know, we have the cool lights and all that crap, but that's the kind of vibe, you know, on a Friday night when we have friends over, you have a couple beers, some steaks on the grill. That's the vibe. Like, that's the Florida vibe that I've caught.
Love it.
So a couple more questions. I'm going to let you go.
Yeah.
You're a professor, as you mentioned, Danielle Gerhardt, who's an amazing PR person, another person who we were connected through.
Yeah.
We came in and presented to your class, and I remember going into that, I wasn't nervous at all. I was like, man, I don't give a shit. I walked in with tattoos, and I remember I had a picture of what my life was, and it was like a war zone, you know, of all the shit I've gone through in years. But recently you had me talk to your management 301 class.
Yeah.
I've never been more shook in my entire life, nervous to present to these kids. Again, it was different. It wasn't in person.
Yeah.
And I realized, I told my wife, she goes, how'd it go? I'm like, there were 3 or 4 students that were just on it. And, you know, I had to pry. Here's this goofy guy, blah, blah, blah. He's done all these things. I'm like, guys, ask me anything. I'm here to help you. If you're interested in something, I might be able to connect you with someone or whatever. And I went to my wife after. I'm like, I've never felt more just not cool in my entire life. Like, you know, I feel like I can entertain a room. They were tough. Yeah. How do you stay relative? Because again, you're cool. You're doing all this cool stuff. But again, we're in our 40s. These kids are 18 or 19 to 22. How do you keep that relevancy?
I was like, look, this isn't a flex on you. If you think about this the right way, right? If it took me till I don't know these numbers exactly, but if it took me till I was 38 to be a C-level person in an ad agency and listen to all the dumb shit that I've done, you should get there by 32, right? So to me, if you make it about them and you're still authentic to yourself, right? Like, you know, I'll like checkered Vans are cool for me and for them, but like, and Air Force Ones might be, but they, you know, they'll like, listen to some music and I was playing something the other day and like, dude, this is not cool. I'm like, this is super cool. So if you're authentic with it, they'll get down with it, but you have to make it about them. And that's not catering to them or pandering to Generation Z at all.
Like, knowing your audience.
Yeah, dude, they're dropping $58,000 a year to go to this school, right? They need to get their money's worth. So to me, it's that. But I also think, though, that's why you related well to them, both in person and online, is because you're coming in saying, look, this is my truth. And once if they see you're genuinely interested in it and you care about what you're doing, then you're pretty much off to the races. There are people that that you wouldn't define as cool, that are super cool, that the students adore because, you know, there's an older gentleman who is probably he's in his 70s, and they all adore him because he talks to them on their level, but like his own level too. So I think it's more so about the authenticity of it.
You said before how much you respect Eric Mower. I had the honor, which surprised the hell out of me when I was at BHC and lived in Syracuse. I had reached out to him on LinkedIn and I said, I just want you to know I worked for an agency that you guys took over, and I wish I had been there when you were a part of it. And I read everything. I've read your story. I mean, I've followed everything he ever did. And he invited me. We went to Provisions and sat and had oatmeal for breakfast.
Awesome.
I have never been, like, I never had a grandfather. Both my grandfathers passed away before I was born. And I was like a little kid, you know, that little kid that just sits there and is like, come on, tell me more. I do the same thing with my father-in-law, who's military, and I hear all the stories. But Eric Moore, talk about what he meant to you, and then seeing your wife follow in his footsteps to run one of the best agencies I've ever seen.
Yeah, so that's a cool story about you and him at Provisions, and I've gotten to know him now in a different level because with my wife being the new his like, heir, I suppose, as the CEO. But when I worked there, I was working like a new business role, and my approach, like yours, and the goal was to be a bit aggressive and just try to do some different shit and get out there. And I was like, well, this guy's old school. I wonder if he's going to be like that. But he was actually really, really great to me. And I remember going after a client that I won't mention. It was a big client. We had a shot. And he's like, look, you're going to be a strong man, and here's what's going to happen. But if you think you really want to give it a shot, go for it. So I did. And we failed. And remember him taking me into his office, and he's like, so what did we learn? And I'm like, that I should listen to you more often. He goes, that's not what I'm saying, but here's some warning things. He took the time out to teach. Meanwhile, by the way, when I mentioned it costs us money, like the bills to travel, everything else, like, were $27,000. I just spent $27,000 of this man's money on a complete failure. But instead of being like admonishing me, he would actually sit down and explain, like, here's why we do that. And at the time, actually, I also remember he was opposed to crowdsourcing when it first became a thing, because he was afraid of how it would impact. And it's still a controversial discussion among agency people to this day. And he was opposed to crowdsourcing. But I personally was in support of the idea of crowdsourcing and thought we should pitch it and us manage the process. And I remember him hearing me say that, like, through somebody else, and he stopped me in the hallway and he's like, let's sit down and talk about it. And he wasn't trying to convince me the other way. He wanted to actually learn about it. The guy reads like 5 newspapers a day, and he's just a really good person that cares. But it's interesting because you look at him, you don't think of this guy as like, I mean, he almost looks like he's an investment banker that owns a bunch of law firms. But he's super intuitive, understands people's emotional intelligence. And with Stephanie, I think one of the things is that they connect on is their big passion for the gig and their hard work. But Stephanie wears her emotion more on her sleeve than Eric does. And I think he wanted something and someone that's going to deliver some of the things in the same spirit, but a different take on it. So I guess the end of the day, for me, he's a person that's done it and like really crushed it, but is so curious. Like he'll occasionally, probably every other week or so, maybe once every 3 weeks, will email me something and be like, look at this recipe I saw in the New York Times. Or have you thought about like he sent me a note about making a hurricane with vodka, and I'm like, I actually have done that. So, he's one of those people that I think like you, and I hope like me, and my wife, he's always curious. So, I mean, the guy's in his 70s and still does everything. Like, I mean, truthfully, probably if his wife didn't put pressure on him, he probably, and she never told me that at all, but I'm just saying, like, I could still, he's the type of person that like Tom Brady, dude, like, until someone kind of told him he should retire, that guy still wants to play. And I think
And
Eric
he could.
play.
He could.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I sat there and I was just in amazement. Not only has he done everything that people like you and I aspire to do,
Right.
he's a gentleman. And,
Totally.
that's rare because it's a tough industry. To be able to stay true to yourself like that, I think is amazing. A couple last questions.
Yeah.
You mentioned, you were cooking up some potatoes and, being a potato farmer, I couldn't help but want to ask you, what's your favorite kind of potato to cook and to eat?
So lately, there's these little ones that are called Dutch peewees, and they're made in like this volcanic. They're grown with this volcanic ash. So I love them because they have this really cool, sweet little flavor. So my favorite ones to cook have been those, but they're too small to make into French fries. So I like a good Yukon Gold for that with the French fry press, and especially like a good pound free, like a shoestring type. I really love doing that. But my favorite potato to eat actually are not ones that I've ever made, but like the blue Terra potato chips that are thick and super crunchy and salty. JetBlue Airlines used to leave them on their plane. Dude, that's my favorite type of potato, and I want to like normalize blue potatoes, but
They should be. They're good, and you need to go down to our old farm in Chenango and get my cousin to give you a bucket full of muck. They call it black gold, and you can grow any kind of potato all year round.
Really?
It's amazing. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Your background with that makes me wonder though too. Like I think about, we had the pleasure doing some work with John Stage at Dinosaur Barbecue, and we were like, so what do you like to cook at home? And he's like, man, I don't do that. Like he was like, a dentist doesn't go home and look at pictures of teeth. So when you think about, and I think I got that quote from Yellowstone or some badass show, but for you, having grown up literally with potatoes, are you still into potatoes or?
Every meal. I mean, I love it. It's not, I have, and you can't see it. There's two original signs from my grandfather and his brothers. They were onion farmers in the 1930s. And then he broke off and switched to potatoes. My dad and my uncle came out of their careers when my grandfather got sick and took over. And really, my dad on the operational side, his brain worked. It was like a computer and engineering. And my uncle was marketing and sales. And they built one of the largest potato farms in the Northeast. Everybody gives Hinderwaddles credit for salt potatoes. Yep. That's a bunch of bullshit. San Panabianco and Sons. But I've got the second oldest sign on my back wall, and I keep it to remind me of what hard work is and what dedication and everything my dad was and stood for. But we had some form of potato at every meal. And for a while, I was like, ugh, I'm done. But now as an adult, I'm like, I want a potato all the time.
Yeah.
So you got to get creative. But I saw you doing the hash with it, and I was like, man, I got to get in there with that. Last question for you. You mentioned alligators and all of that and what you like to cook with.
Yep.
When are you going to come down to Orlando to film? I'm going to put you on my father-in-law's ranch. We can go hunt gators. We can hunt wild boar. It's a 10,000 acre ranch in the green swamp of Central Florida. Come on location, grab Rob, give him a couple, roadies, and let's go.
Dude, you know what? I'm glad you said that because as we approach season 2, and we're in like Jackson, Mississippi is one of the markets I think that we're coming up in. We want to be able to start filming, and we're going to start filming in different locations to make it just to create that connection. And Orlando, I mean, we wanted to bring you into the party scene, maybe tell some stories.
Let's do it.
But here's the deal: we would totally do this, but you got to wrestle the gator. You know what I mean? We got to see you like.
We have, buddy. I'll do you one better. I'll wait. My brother-in-law is like the crocodile hunter. I've seen him dive into the water after a 10-foot gator.
What?
He's insane. He is not afraid of anything. So they have a license to get him, and it's the best gator tail you've ever had. I'd love you dress it right there, chop the tail off, take care of it, throw it in the fryer. I can't wait to see what you do with it.
Oh, man.
But I mean, after it's dead, I'll get on it and act like I did it.
Yeah, totally. Dude, Chris, I'm down. Let's make that happen.
I love it. Matt, dude, you are one of the coolest cats I know. Keep it up. I'm one of your biggest fans, and I really appreciate you taking the time to help me out getting this thing off the ground, and hopefully we can do some cool shit together soon.
Dude, listen, I super appreciate you, and I want to find a way to work again with you, because I remember when working with you and we were trying to find ways to work together. There's people that just make you want to do cool shit, and you're one of them. So
thank you, brother.
Thanks, man.
I appreciate you.
All right. Thanks.
You'll make this rather snappy, won't you? I have some very heavy thinking to do before 10 o'clock.